This week on Real Talk with Denver7 and CPR News, breaking barriers in business.
There are thousands of women-owned businesses right here in Colorado, but those entrepreneurs faced a lot of hurdles to get where they are.
I sort of realized, wow, this is what the adversity of being one of the few females sitting at the table really looks like.
We're hearing from some women about the unique struggles they had to overcome.
We didn't have the same access to resources.
Plus, the support available in the state to get more women in business.
Welcome to Real Talk with Denver7 and CPR News. I'm Denver7's Micah Smith.
And I'm Colorado Public Radio's Nathan Fernando-Frescas. Each week, in a partnership between Denver7 and CPR, we have a real talk about issues impacting underrepresented people across Colorado and amplifying voices you may not always hear.
This Women's History Month, we're talking about women-led businesses in Colorado and the unique struggles female entrepreneurs face.
Women have been leading and launching their own companies for decades in the U.S., but they still face more hidden barriers to do so compared to their male counterparts.
A recent study from CU Boulder found cultural biases and network segregation hinder women from accessing the crucial mentorship support they need to help start a business or secure investments.
Researchers discovered while both male and female entrepreneurs reach out to mentors of both genders equally, male mentors are disproportionately more likely to accept mentorship requests from male interns.
Researchers say this bias is likely due to a natural tendency to form closer relationships to people similar to you. Researchers say increasing female representation in mentorship roles is a crucial step toward fighting these biases, especially in industries where women have historically been underrepresented.
So for many women, they've had to tackle the world of business and entrepreneurship alone. And we want to hear directly from women who have done just that on how they reached their achievements and the struggles they faced along the way. Joining us now is Lindsay Tersey. She's a realtor broker associate with the West and Main Homes and lives in Denver. Lindsay, thanks so much for being here for this Real Talk.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me.
So real estate is your focus now, but you're a former golf professional. That's quite the transition. Talk a little bit about that.
It is. Although when you look at my entire career path, I think it does make sense. So, yes, I started out as a golf teaching and club professional under the certification of the LPGA. I worked for a number of different courses in the Denver metro area. But then I transitioned into accounting. So I did that for a while thinking that I was going to be a CPA. And very quickly realized that I missed so much the teaching and coaching aspect that I had did before. And so that didn't really fit into the accounting world, right? And so it was trying to figure out what was going to be the best path to sort of combine both of those skill sets. And so my last corporate role that I held was a VP of administration in the logistics world, so very much a pivot again. And so I think coming out of that role and really just understanding how to run a business. So you have that separate side of running a business versus also doing whatever it is that your craft, right? So in this case, being a realtor. It sort of brought everything together for me, the working with people and building relationships and networking in combination with the accounting and finance side of being able to, when you're working with clients, speak to them about what that looks like to purchase and to sell a home. And so I think, combining all of those skills landed me in the place of being a realtor because I get to use all of my education and all of my skill set. And so I think, it just kind of became the perfect role for me.
Yeah, that is a strong skill set. You're a graduate of Regis University's MBA program. And again, you've worked in hospitality, logistics, and real estate investment trust. Looking back, though, what were some concerns you had being a woman in these fields?
Yeah, so, I played a lot of golf in high school and not thinking at all that I was going to go into the golf world. But I was playing as a 16-year-old female in the men's club, right? So I was often surrounded by men at a young age. And so I think, I became very comfortable being in that atmosphere. So I was a little bit naive, quite frankly, to what other women I think were facing and certainly going into the corporate world. And so it wasn't really until later on in my golf professional career and then moving into the corporate world that I think I sort of realized, wow, this is what the adversity of being one of the few females sitting at the table really looks like. And so that was sort of a little bit of a slap in the face, right? The thing that I think I experienced was just that was so difficult was there's a way in which you're looking to your male colleagues to have them, give you the respect that you feel like you deserve to be sitting in that role. And I think just sort of seeking their approval in some ways. And I think that's a difficult piece for sure to sort of get through.
And you talk a lot about moving from position to position and making that, I call it the squiggle.
Yes.
That moving from industry, that finding what fits you best. Can you talk about how mentorship played a role in all of that? You're a mentor at Regis University right now. And how important is that for young women trying to figure out their own path and learning how you move through your industry to get where you are now?
Yeah, I think mentorship is something that is so important. I was extremely fortunate to have really great mentors, and I would say males and females. The amount of information that you can acquire from someone who has been in a role that you are trying to obtain, right, and they have 20 years of that experience, that is something that can catapult you into a very different place relative to your peers. And I think it's something that, for me, having that experience and that opportunity and being where I'm at now in my career is so important for me to sort of pay that forward. It's something that is also really important for young people right now, right? Because technology and social media, and there's all of that sort of gets in the way, I think, of sitting down and having real conversations in person. And I think there's a lot of value there. And going back to the point of Regis, I mean, I was just there speaking to a couple of classes last week. And I ended up inviting those students to my event that I held at the press club. And I was so proud of all of those students. About half of them ended up showing up for that event. And just the fact that they were willing to be brave and to walk through those doors and to come and have conversations with people and connect and be able to take that opportunity and understand the significance of that, I think was really important. And I was very proud of them.
Well, that's an important skill. And I think we overlook, like, a lot of young people, their interactions are fully online.
Exactly.
And if not online, through their phones. They're texting their friends. They're FaceTiming their friends. They're not sitting down or, back in my day, oh boy, that term. Back in my day, my mom dropped us off at the mall and we just had a time we'd be dropped off and picked up. So they're not necessarily gaining those in-person, interpersonal skills the way that we were when we were younger.
Exactly.
So that's huge. Lindsay Tersey, Realtor Broker Associate with West and Main Homes. Thank you so much for being here for this Real Talk.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me.
We are just getting started with this Real Talk. Coming up, we're hearing from one woman who founded her own magazine about the challenges she faced as a woman of color along the way.
This is Real Talk with Denver7 and CPR News. Welcome back to Real Talk with Denver7 and CPR News. I'm Colorado Public Radio's Nathan Fernando-Frescas.
And I'm Denver7's Micah Smith. Over the years, shifting societal norms have led to a big rise in women in the workforce. But the numbers are still far from equitable when it comes to entrepreneurship.
Yeah, in Colorado, U.S. Census data shows roughly 23% of businesses in Colorado are women-owned. That's less than a quarter compared to a population that makes up about half of the state.
And despite that, Colorado actually ranks second in the nation for the most female-led businesses. There's even greater barriers for women entrepreneurs of color, though.
And it's a systemic issue our next guest knows personally. Joining us now is Annie Van Dan, who is the president of Asian Avenue Magazine, a publication focused on the Asian Pacific American community and culture. Annie, thank you so much for being here for this Real Talk.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Annie, Asian Avenue Magazine has become a significant part of Colorado's Asian and Pacific Islander community. What inspired you to start the publication?
So I've been working on it for almost 20 years now. I started it with my mom in 2006. I was actually just graduated right out of school. So I did go to school for journalism at the University of Missouri, but I grew up here in Denver. And my parents, when they had immigrated here, my mom had been a journalist in Taiwan, and she just kind of gave up that career to just work in retail, because of a lot of the language barriers and challenges of trying to get back into like this field she loved. And so it happened to be that I also went to school for journalism. So when I graduated, it was really actually my mom's like vision for the community. To have this platform to really showcase and spotlight Asian Americans, because I will say really back then, the Asian population was only 3% of the state's population. And since 2020, it's 5%. So it's growing, but, we're really invisible in a lot of spaces. And so the vision around creating the magazine was to kind of meet this need and gap that, the community didn't have.
And I think, starting anything, right, is very challenging, but let alone starting a magazine, a publication, being a woman of color for you and your mother. Did you face any barriers when launching and growing this magazine because of that fact?
Yes, I think one of the hardest challenges is just not having the resources and the awareness of, like what's available even. My mom, I think, took a lot of risk and, just kind of went all in on this idea. And so the first few years were really hard. Like just kind of not even knowing like how to run a magazine, right? And I think too how different things were in 2006 to now, especially with like technology and social media. I mean, a lot of what we were doing back then was literally like going door to door and like asking businesses to advertise with us. And because it is a free publication, we didn't really like have really source of revenue other than ad sales, right? And so back then, people really didn't even use email. And I'll just say because the community we're also trying to serve are also small business immigrant communities, right? So many of them are not, in front of a computer checking email. And so right now, for example, we're working on like developing a Mile High Asian Food Week for the Denver community. And my mom and I actually tried it like years ago. And it's so different now because everything through Instagram or social media, we're just communicating so quickly and being able to collaborate very quickly. But back then it was literally like going in and trying to explain and like show people what this magazine is and justify why it's worth like, putting an ad in here. And so I think a lot of the barriers was just the fact that we didn't have the same access to resources that maybe someone that, like kind of had like generational experience could pass on or connections like into the magazine or media industry. We just didn't have any of that.
You've been doing this for a while now, though, and you mentioned kind of some of the changes you've experienced. Did those changes lead to changes in support and opportunities for the magazine?
Yes. So I will say there's just been a lot more support after and around the pandemic times. There was multiple times we thought about shutting it down altogether. The big one I think was in like 2008, 2009, and we had just started. But it was really when the economy was like collapsing around then, and a lot of businesses weren't advertising. They were struggling too. And that was always a challenge with this magazine around we're trying to support the community and wanting to do things for free and also trying to explain like, well, we have to print this thing and that costs a lot of money. And so again, around the pandemic, it was really hard because, everything just kind of closed very quickly, right? And the publication is at different locations physically there for people to pick up. And now all of these places were closed too. So we just had to kind of pivot with that. And around that time, though, more funders kind of came up to bat and support community media. And so we received some grants from Colorado Media Project that really helped alleviate a lot of like our role in getting ads. Yeah. And then we also received the Press Forward grant, which is a national grant that supports like small community publications like ours.
I love the fact that someone can go and pick up this magazine, open it up, see your face, see your mother's face in there, and physically say, this is a part of my community. I'm a part of that. Moving forward, how would you advise other women like you to overcome maybe some of the barriers you saw and focus on progress and moving forward in your community?
There is a little bit of risk taking for sure. Yeah. And I think just from our own experience around, had we waited till we had all these resources and really knew what we were doing, I don't know if we would have ever gotten here, And so I think just kind of trust in yourself that, you your heart is in the right place, and that people and community will come together to support you once they see that, your passion. For me personally, I just feel like so many people started like surrounding me with support and resources once they knew what we were trying to do for the community.
I just want to say, like, this is a really big deal. What you're doing is a really big deal. For decades now, we've been hearing of publications closing and how impossible it is to even enter the industry as a writer or a publisher. So I want our viewers and listeners to know, like, this is really, really hard stuff. And the fact that you've figured out a way to do it and serve such an underserved community is truly a beautiful thing. So Annie Van Dan with Asian Avenue Magazine, thank you so much for joining us for this Real Talk.
Thank you.
With all these challenges facing female entrepreneurs, there are resources in the state to help women overcome obstacles to starting their own business. We'll hear from one organization working to do just that coming up.
This is Real Talk with Denver7 and CPR News. Welcome back to Real Talk with Denver7 and CPR News. I'm Denver7's Micah Smith.
And I'm Colorado Public Radio's Nathan Fernando-Frescas.
Throughout this episode, we've heard from businesswomen and the unique struggles that they face. But for many women, these hurdles are even more motivation for them to enter the world of entrepreneurship and break down barriers.
Yeah, there's a lot of support and resources right here in Colorado for women looking to start their own businesses with the hope of leveling that playing field.
And here to tell us more about those resources is Simone Ross, President and CEO of Colorado's Women's Chamber of Commerce. Simone, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for inviting me.
What exactly does the Women's Chamber do for our listeners and viewers who are familiar with the name but may not know the exact function?
Yeah, the Colorado Women's Chamber of Commerce. It's really our state's institution for supporting women in business and our state's institution for advocating at the intersection of women in business. And so our goal is to provide women with a network of like-minded leaders that can help them at every intersection of their career or their journey. So we've got membership from some of our largest corporations, inclusive of Kaiser Permanente, DaVita, Molson Coors. I could go on and on about those. But then we've also got phenomenal entrepreneurs representing anything from professional services to graphic design and marketing, makers. And so we're really the community that is providing that support. And then we have an advocacy arm, too, of the Colorado Women's Chamber of Commerce. And so yes, we are advocating for business policies, but CWCC is looking at the women that work in those businesses. And we're saying, how do some of these policies impact women in business? And we really are the only advocate that is looking at women and business from an advocacy perspective.
And so what are some of the specific challenges you're seeing women-owned businesses face right now today?
Colorado is a good place for women in business. Statistically, Colorado is the number one state in the U.S. for women to start businesses. It is the number 2 state for women-led businesses. Colorado is actually doing a little bit better than the national average when we look at women occupying C-suite positions on a national level. 29% of women occupy C-suite positions. In Colorado, we're at 30%. I said just a little bit better. And so Colorado is a good place for women in business. Now, what I will say is that Colorado, like any other state in the U.S., has its challenges when it comes to funding women-owned businesses. And then when we look at kind of the compounding effects that women face, 1.9% of venture funds are given to women firms. 0.34% of that 1.9% is given to Black women-led teams when it comes to venture. Then when you kind of pare that down a little bit, access to capital it's a continual barrier. For goodness sakes, we just got our right to be able to get a house 50 years ago without having a man sign for it. And so you can't expect that suddenly everything is fixed when it comes to lending and access to capital and just the sheer bias that is there. So that's an issue.
I'm so glad you mentioned some of the history of it, because I admit I learned not too long ago from my grandma that women needed like co-signers on credit cards
50
years ago. Mm-hmm. I'm like, what? I could have guessed capital was an issue, funding was an issue. What other challenges are you seeing, and what is most needed to help these businesses overcome those challenges?
So I'm okay. I was never really like the popular kid anyway, so I'm okay with being a little unpopular today. I think one of the biggest challenges, especially as we look at our new climate, is really people being encouraged not to focus on MBEs, that's minority business enterprises, or women business enterprises, WBEs. That's going to be a huge concern. Formerly, we had a pretty intentional and concerted effort to make sure that we were supporting small, woman-owned and minority-owned businesses. It was actually stipulated in procurement agreements. When we don't have intentionality placed on those efforts, we then see an economic downshift, and that's going to really harm women-owned businesses. It's going to harm minority-led businesses, Black-owned businesses, Latino-owned businesses. And here's the funny thing about it. That is a personal choice. So you can choose to be intentional about having diverse procurement strategies. You can choose to be collaborative and inclusive. It is a personal choice not to be.
And I think that's a huge point. It is a choice. There is so much happening in the world where that is being stripped away. We're saying DEI, let's not talk about that anymore, right? And I think there is this sense of how are minority-owned businesses, women-owned businesses, how are you going to lift them through this? Because it's not easy. It's not easy to say, we're here. We're standing tall. We're going to be a part of this.
Yeah. And, and it shows within the data. I'm a little bit of a data geek, but
Love
what
it.
we saw in 2024 when we looked at the McKinsey and Lean In reporting is that Black women, it was a downslide, actually, in their presence in C-suite positions and leadership positions. And the same is going to happen when we look at procurement and the economic impact of all of this rhetoric on our women-owned businesses.
What resources does the chamber have to help? I know you cannot solve all the problems of the world, but what can you do to help?
I think that there's also benefits to membership, right? So shameless plug, proud plug, I'll say. It's Women's History Month, proud plug. Join the chamber. We have a lot of groups and peer groups to support women, whether they are founders. We've got our Founders Forum. They meet monthly where they're sharing best practices and getting information and resources. Then we've got our peer groups that supports corporate women to really be able to navigate a very complex and convoluted these days corporate ecosystem, and then just membership in the chamber. We're at the Capitol on a regular basis, advocating for policies that impact the intersection of women in business.
And you're literally just leaving the Capitol to come be with us here on Real Talk. Before we go, because Simone, I think you've spoken a lot of truth to power this episode. What words would you share with women across Colorado listening to this episode who are feeling discouraged right now?
Yeah, it's tough, and I don't ever want to negate that with the pat on the back and say it'll be okay. I think right now it calls for everyone, not just women, but allies. It calls for everybody to again think. Be intentional about your actions. Be intentional about how we're creating succession plans and building sponsorship culture. Be intentional about who we're doing business with. Be intentional about those things because that intentionality is going to produce real results. And also be transparent. Read the data. Be transparent with producing data because the more we know, the more we're able to fill in those gaps, whether it's pay parity, whether it's participation in boards with women. Know the numbers.
All right, Simone Ross, CEO and president of the Colorado Women's Chamber of Commerce. Thank you so much for joining us for this Real Talk.
Thank you.
And that is this episode of Real Talk with Denver7 and CPR News. Every week, we have a real talk about issues that impact Coloradans who are often overlooked.
You can find all of our shows on denver7.com/realtalk or at cpr.org/realtalk. Have a great day.